The town of Cedar Ridge sat like a weathered scar across the red dust plains of western Colorado, its wooden buildings bleached pale by the unforgiving sun. It was 1887, and the land stretched endlessly in all directions, jagged mountains to the north, their peaks cutting into the sky like broken teeth, and vast expanses of scrubland everywhere else. The wind carried grit and the faint smell of pine from the distant forests, mixed with the acrid scent of the silver mine that kept the town alive. Sarah Whitman pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders as she walked along the dusty main street, her 6-year-old daughter Emma clutching her hand. The child's shoes were worn through at the toes, each step leaving small prints in the red earth. Sarah kept her eyes down, avoiding the stares that followed her like shadows. She had grown accustomed to them over the past 2 years since her husband Thomas had died in a mine collapse, leaving her with nothing but debts and a reputation as the woman who had dared to refuse Josiah Crawford. Their destination was the general store, where Sarah hoped Mrs. Henderson might have some washing that needed doing. Each week grew harder, the coins fewer, the meals thinner. But Sarah held her chin high despite the whispers that rustled through Cedar Ridge like tumbleweeds. "There goes the Whitman widow," she heard old Martha Jennings mutter to her companion as they passed. "Still thinking she's too good for Mr. Crawford's money." Sarah's fingers tightened around Emma's small hand, but she said nothing. What was there to say? That she would rather see her daughter grow up poor but proud than wealthy and ashamed. That every time Josiah Crawford looked at her, she felt like prey being circled by a vulture. The general store's bell chimed weakly as they entered. Mrs. Henderson, a stout woman with kind eyes but a worried expression, looked up from her ledger. "Morning, Sarah," she said quietly, glancing toward the back room where her husband kept the accounts. "I'm afraid I don't have any washing today. Business has been slow." Sarah nodded, having expected as much. Word traveled fast in Cedar Ridge, and everyone knew that helping Sarah Whitman meant risking Josiah Crawford's displeasure. "Perhaps the hotel?" Sarah suggested, though she knew Mrs. Blackwood had turned her away last week. Mrs. Henderson's face crumpled with sympathy. "Sarah, dear, Mr. Crawford was in here yesterday. He made it quite clear that anyone who—" She trailed off, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. "I understand," Sarah said softly. "Come, Emma." They left the store and walked toward the edge of town, where their small house, if it could be called that, leaned precariously against the wind. It had been Thomas's attempt at building them a home, but he died before he could finish it properly. Now the walls had gaps that let in the cold, and the roof leaked when the rare rains came. Sarah set Emma to practicing her letters with a piece of charcoal on a flat stone while she surveyed their meager supplies. A handful of cornmeal, some dried beans, a small bit of lard. It would last perhaps 3 more days if she was careful. "Mama, I'm hungry," Emma said quietly, not complaining, just stating a fact. "I know, sweetheart. We'll eat soon." Sarah looked toward the forested hills rising beyond the town. There was wood there for the taking, if one was willing to risk the dangers, wildcats, bears, and worse. Crawford's men who patrolled the best timber areas. But winter was coming, and without wood, they would freeze. She had just resolved to go at dawn when the sound of horses made her look up. 3 riders were approaching, their silhouettes dark against the afternoon sun. Her heart sank as she recognized the lead rider's broad shoulders and expensive black coat. Josiah Crawford. He dismounted with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed, which in Cedar Ridge was nearly true. The silver mine, the largest ranch, shares in most of the businesses. Crawford's influence touched everything. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "I trust you've had time to reconsider my offer?" Sarah stood, placing herself between Crawford and Emma. "My answer hasn't changed. Mr. Crawford." His pale blue eyes narrowed. At 45, he was still what some might call handsome, with silver threading through his dark hair and a closely trimmed beard. But Sarah saw only the coldness in his expression, the possessiveness in his gaze. "You're being foolish," he said, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone addressing a child. "Look at how you live. Look at your daughter. I'm offering you comfort, security, a proper home. You're offering me a cage." Sarah replied quietly. One of Crawford's men snickered, but fell silent at his employer's sharp glance. Crawford stepped closer, and Sarah fought the urge to back away. "Every week you grow thinner. Your daughter grows hungrier. How long before your pride breaks? I wonder. How long before you come begging?" "I will never beg anything from you." His face darkened. "We'll see about that. Winter's coming. Mrs. Whitman, a harsh one. They say that shack won't keep out the cold, but you're a clever woman. I'm sure you'll make the right choice. Eventually." He mounted his horse with practiced ease, looking down at her one last time. "My offer won't stand forever, and there are no other options for a woman like you in Cedar Ridge. Remember that." They rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Sarah standing in her barren yard, fists clenched at her sides. Emma crept out from behind her skirts. "Why does that man keep coming here? Mama?" Sarah knelt and smoothed her daughter's tangled hair. "Because some people think they can buy anything they want, sweetheart. But they're wrong." That night, as Emma slept on their straw-filled mattress, Sarah sat by the window, staring out at the stars scattered across the vast western sky. She thought of Thomas, of his gentle hands and easy laugh, of the dreams they'd shared of building a real home, of raising Emma in freedom and dignity. Tomorrow she would venture into the woods. She would gather what fuel she could, trade it perhaps for food. She would survive another day, another week. But for how long? Crawford was right about one thing. Winter was coming, and it would be harsh. In the distance, a coyote howled, its lonely cry echoing across the plains. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself and allowed a single tear to fall. Not for herself, but for Emma, for the life she couldn't give her daughter. She didn't know that at that very moment. A lone farmer named Samuel Hart was mending his fence by moonlight 3 miles away. Having heard talk in town about the widow's plight, he worked his rocky patch of land from dawn to dusk, owning little more than the clothes on his back and a determination to make something grow in the unforgiving soil. Samuel had seen her in town, had witnessed the way Crawford circled her like a predator. He'd wanted to help but knew his interference would only make things worse. A penniless farmer had no business challenging a man like Crawford, but sometimes, he thought as he hammered another post into the hard ground, a man had to stand for something, even if he stood alone. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain and the promise of harder times ahead. In her drafty house, Sarah finally lay down beside Emma, pulling their thin blanket up to their chins. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, at least, they were together and free. The red dust settled over Cedar Ridge as the town slept, unaware that the threads of fate were already beginning to weave a pattern that would challenge everything they believed about power, pride, and the price of love. The Saturday market in Cedar Ridge was the heart of the town's social life, where farmers brought their produce, women gossiped over fabric bolts, and men discussed cattle prices and mining prospects. Sarah had avoided it for weeks, but necessity drove her there with a small bundle of kindling she'd gathered at dawn, hoping to trade for cornmeal. The sun blazed overhead as she set up her meager wares at the edge of the market square, Emma sitting quietly beside her with a rag doll Sarah had fashioned from scraps. The other vendors gave her a wide berth, their eyes sliding away when she looked in their direction. Sarah had just completed a small trade with old Jacob Miller, who'd taken pity and given her a few potatoes for her wood. When the crowd's chatter suddenly died, she looked up to see Josiah Crawford striding through the market, flanked by his foreman Wade Garrison and another hired hand. Crawford wore his finest suit despite the heat, a gold watch chain glinting across his vest. He stopped directly in front of Sarah's small space, and the remaining crowd seemed to press closer, sensing drama like wolves scenting blood. "Mrs. Whitman," Crawford announced, his voice carrying across the square. I've been patient with you, more patient than most men would be with a stubborn woman who doesn't know what's good for her. Sarah stood slowly, aware of every eye upon them. Mr. Crawford, this isn't the place. On the contrary, he interrupted, removing his hat with a flourish. This is exactly the place. These good people should witness this. He dropped to one knee in the dust, and several women gasped. Emma pressed closer to her mother's skirts. Sarah Whitman, I'm offering you marriage, a home at the finest ranch in the county. Your daughter will have proper clothes, proper schooling. You'll have servants, respect, everything a woman could want. He pulled out a small velvet box, revealing a ring with a stone that caught the light like captured fire. All you have to do is say yes. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah felt the weight of the crowd's expectation, some hoping for the fairy tale ending, others eager for the spectacle of refusal. Stand up, Mr. Crawford, she said quietly. Not until I have your answer. Sarah lifted her chin. Then you'll be kneeling a long time. I would rather die of hunger than be your wife. The silence shattered. Women whispered behind their hands. Men shifted uncomfortably. Crawford's face went from red to white to red again as he rose, dust on his expensive trousers. You dare, he began, but Sarah cut him off. I dare to choose my own path. I dare to say no to a man who thinks he can buy whatever he desires. My husband is barely 2 years in the ground, and you think I would dishonor his memory for your money? Your husband left you with nothing, Crawford snarled, his carefully cultivated composure cracking. You're a fool, woman! Perhaps, but I'm a free fool. Someone in the crowd chuckled, a dangerous sound. Crawford whirled, searching for the source, and the laughter died. You think this is amusing? He shouted at the crowd. This woman spits on an honest offer, chooses poverty and starvation for her child out of stupid pride. It ain't stupid to know your own mind, called out Martha Jennings unexpectedly. Several heads turned to the old woman in surprise. Crawford's face contorted. He grabbed Sarah's arm roughly. You're making a mistake. Let go of me. Not until you see sense. Sarah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Emma began to cry, and the sound seemed to break something in the crowd's passive watching. The lady said, Let go. A new voice spoke up. Everyone turned to see Samuel Hart standing at the edge of the crowd. He was a tall, lean man with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, his clothes patched but clean. Sarah recognized him vaguely, the farmer who kept to himself, working the rocky plot east of town. Crawford didn't release Sarah's arm. This doesn't concern you. Hart, tend to your rocks and weeds. Maybe not, Samuel said, stepping forward. But I don't hold with seeing a woman handled rough. Let her go. Wade Garrison moved toward Samuel, but Crawford raised his free hand to stop him. You want to defend her? Hart, you? Crawford laughed, an ugly sound. What can you offer her? You can barely feed yourself. At least I'm trying to save her from starvation. Seems to me she's made her choice clear, Samuel said steadily. A man who can't accept a woman's no ain't much of a man. The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Crawford released Sarah's arm with a shove that nearly sent her sprawling. Samuel steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow, then stepped between her and Crawford. You've just made an enemy. Hart, Crawford said softly, dangerously. I've survived worse. Crawford's hand twitched toward the pistol at his hip, but the presence of witnesses stayed him. Instead, he turned his rage on the crowd. You all see this? He shouted. You see what happens when people forget their place, when they bite the hand that feeds this town. He pointed at Sarah. Anyone who helps her, trades with her, even speaks to her, will answer to me. And you, Hart, I'll see you broken before winter's out. He gestured sharply to his men. Wade, Tom, we have a lesson to teach about respect. What happened next burned itself into Cedar Ridge's memory. The two hired hands descended on Sarah's small display, kicking over her gathered wood, grinding the potatoes Jacob had given her into the dust. When she tried to stop them, Tom Briggs backhanded her across the face, sending her to her knees. The crowd surged forward in shock, but Crawford's men had their hands on their guns now, and fear won over outrage. Samuel started toward Sarah, but Wade Garrison struck him with the butt of his rifle, dropping him to the dirt. "Stop!" Emma screamed, throwing herself over her mother. "Stop hurting her!" For a moment, the child's cry froze everyone. Then Crawford himself stepped forward and kicked over Sarah's basket, scattering her few possessions. "This is what defiance brings," he announced to the crowd. "Remember that." They mounted their horses and rode off, leaving Sarah bleeding in the dust, Samuel struggling to rise, and the crowd standing in shamed silence. It was Martha Jennings who moved first, bustling forward with her handkerchief. "For shame," she muttered, loud enough for all to hear. "For shame on all of us. Standing by like cowards." Others began to move then, some toward Sarah, others quickly away, not wanting to be associated with the scene. Jacob Miller helped Samuel to his feet, while Martha and another woman tended to Sarah's split lip. "I'm sorry," Samuel said roughly, swaying slightly. "I only made things worse." Sarah looked at him through one eye. The other was already swelling shut. "You tried. That's more than anyone else did. Mama?" Emma's voice was small, scared. Sarah pulled her daughter close with her good arm. "I'm all right. Sweetheart, we're going home now." "Let me help you," Samuel offered. "No," Sarah said quickly. "You've done enough. Crawford will come after you now, too." Samuel's jaw set stubbornly. "Let him come." But Sarah was already gathering what remained of her things, moving like a woman in pain, but not broken. The crowd parted for her as she walked away, Emma's hand in hers, her head still high despite the blood on her face. Samuel watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not pity, she was too strong for that. Something else, recognition, perhaps, of a kindred spirit who'd rather break than bend. "You're a fool, Hart," Jacob Miller said quietly beside him. "Crawford will ruin you." "Maybe," Samuel agreed, his eyes still on Sarah's retreating figure. "But some things are worth being ruined for." The market slowly returned to its business, but the morning's events had left a mark. In corners and behind stalls, people whispered about what they'd seen, about Crawford's cruelty and Sarah's courage, about the quiet farmer who'd stood up when no one else would. And in his grand house on the hill, Josiah Crawford stood at his window, watching the town below with cold satisfaction. Let them whisper. Let them see what happened to those who defied him. Sarah Whitman would come to him eventually, when hunger and cold broke her pride. He didn't understand that he'd already lost, that in his public display of power, he'd planted seeds of resistance in hearts that had long been dormant. And he certainly didn't understand that some people, like Sarah Whitman and Samuel Hart, had spines forged from harder stuff than hunger or fear could break. Samuel Hart's farm sat 3 miles east of Cedar Ridge, where the good soil ended and the rocky ground began. It wasn't much to look at, 40 acres of stubborn land that fought him for every carrot and potato he coaxed from it. His house was solid but small, built with his own hands from timber he'd cut and hauled himself. The barn leaned slightly to the south, as if tired from fighting the constant wind. He'd come to Colorado 5 years ago with dreams and a small inheritance, enough to buy this unfavorable plot that nobody else wanted. The first year, he'd nearly starved. The second, he'd learned which crops could survive the poor soil and scarce water. By the third, he was scraping by. Now, in his 5th year, he had enough to feed himself and sometimes a little extra to trade. Samuel had never married. There'd been a girl once, back in Ohio, but her father had made it clear that a farmhand with no prospects wasn't suitable for his daughter. That rejection had driven him west, where a man could be judged by his work rather than his birth. Or so he'd hoped. The morning after the market incident, Samuel stood in his field, trying to focus on the irrigation ditch that needed repair. His head still ached from where Garrison had struck him, but worse was the memory of Sarah Whitman's bloodied face and the crowd's cowardice, his own included. He should have acted sooner, spoken up louder, his few chickens scratched in the yard, and his old plow horse, Augustus, grazed on the sparse grass. It was a peaceful scene, but Samuel couldn't shake his unease. Crawford didn't make idle threats. 3 days later, Samuel found Sarah collapsed at the edge of the forest, a half-filled bundle of sticks beside her. Her face was healing but still bruised, and she was burning with fever. "Emma," she mumbled when he knelt beside her. "Have to get back to Emma." "Where is she?" Samuel asked urgently. "Home. Mrs. Martinez watching her. Just for an hour." Samuel didn't waste time on more questions. He lifted Sarah carefully, she weighed almost nothing, and carried her to his wagon. Augustus plodded slowly but steadily back to town, where Samuel pounded on Rosa Martinez's door. The Mexican woman's face went pale when she saw Sarah. "Ay, Dios mío, I told her not to go alone, but she insisted." "Can you keep Emma a while longer?" Samuel asked. Rosa nodded, crossing herself. "Si, of course. The poor Nina. She will be so worried." Samuel took Sarah to his farm. He couldn't risk taking her to her own home. It was too exposed, too cold, and Crawford's men had been seen lurking nearby. His house wasn't much, but it was warm and safe. For 2 days. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness while Samuel tended to her as best he could. He made broth from a chicken he couldn't really spare, kept the fever down with cool cloths, and sat by her bedside through the long nights. On the 3rd day, she finally woke fully, blinking in confusion at the unfamiliar ceiling. "Emma?" was her first word. "She's safe with Mrs. Martinez," Samuel assured her quickly. "You're at my place. You collapsed in the woods." Sarah struggled to sit up, then fell back with a gasp. "I have to go. Emma needs me. You need to rest. You've been sick for 3 days. 3 days. Panic flared in her eyes. "She must be terrified. And you, Crawford will—" "Let me worry about Crawford." Samuel's voice was firm. "Right now, you need to get your strength back. I'll send word to Mrs. Martinez that you're recovering." Sarah studied him, this quiet man who'd risked Crawford's wrath for her. "Why are you doing this?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering. "My PA used to say that a man's measure wasn't in what he owned, but in what he'd stand for. I may not have much, but I've got enough to know right from wrong. It's dangerous to know me," Sarah said softly. "Crawford will destroy you. Maybe, but I've been alone on this farm for 5 years. Miss Sarah, maybe it's time I stood for something besides crops and chickens. Despite everything." Sarah almost smiled. "It's Mrs. Whitman." "I know." Samuel's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile, too. "Doesn't seem right, though. You're younger than me, and calling you Mrs. makes me feel like I'm talking to my old school marm." This time Sarah did smile. "Just a little. How old are you, Mr. Hart?" 32 come spring? You? 26. She was quiet for a moment. Thomas was older. Everyone said I was lucky to catch him, even if he was just a minor. They said the same about Crawford, that I should be grateful for his interest. What do you say? Sarah's eyes flashed with some of their old fire. I say that I'd rather choose my own path, even if it's harder. Samuel nodded slowly. I can understand that. It's why I left Ohio. Everyone there knew exactly what Samuel Hart was worth. Nothing much, out here. I thought maybe I could be worth something I chose myself. And are you? He gestured around the simple room. I've got a roof that don't leak much, food enough to share, and land that's mine even if it's poor. That's something. It's more than I have. Sarah said quietly. No. Samuel disagreed. You've got something worth more than land or money. You've got the courage to stand up to men like Crawford. That's rare. They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted across the rocky fields, painting them gold. Samuel eventually rose to tend to his evening chores, but not before making sure Sarah had water and another bowl of broth. That night, as Sarah slept in his bed while he made do with blankets by the fire, Samuel allowed himself to really think about what he was doing. He'd invited Crawford's wrath, That was certain. The man would come after his farm, his meager livelihood. But sitting there watching the firelight flicker on the walls, listening to Sarah's peaceful breathing, Samuel found he didn't much care. The next morning, Sarah insisted on getting up despite Samuel's protests. She was steadier on her feet, though still pale. "I need to get back to Emma," she said. "She must be beside herself." "I'll take you," Samuel offered. "But Sarah, your house, it's not safe there anymore. Crawford's been having his men watch it." Sarah's jaw tightened. "It's my home." "It's a target," Samuel countered gently. "You and Emma, you could stay here for a while, just until things settle." Sarah looked at him sharply. "People would talk. People are already talking. At least here you'd be safe. I'd sleep in the barn. Proper-like. It's not right. You and the little one freezing in that shack while I've got a solid house." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, pride warring with practicality. What would you want in return? The question stung, but Samuel understood it. Nothing. Just to help. Maybe to prove that not every man thinks like Crawford. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you'd rather gather wood until you collapse than take Crawford's money. I know you love your daughter more than your own life. I know you've got more spine than half the men in Cedar Ridge." He paused. "That's enough to know." Sarah blinked hard, looking away. It had been so long since anyone had offered help without strings attached that she'd almost forgotten such kindness existed. "Just for a few days," she said finally, "until I can figure out something else." Samuel nodded, trying not to show his relief. "I'll take you to get Emma now. We'll bring your things back too." As they prepared to leave, Sarah touched his arm. "Samuel, thank you for everything." He covered her hand briefly with his own. Work roughened but gentle. "No need for thanks. It's just the right thing to do." But as they rode toward town in his creaky wagon, both of them knew it was more than that. In a world where might made right and money talked loudest, choosing to do the right thing was its own form of revolution. And revolutions, as they would soon learn, always came with a price. The days that followed Sarah and Emma's arrival at Samuel's farm fell into a quiet rhythm that surprised them all. Samuel rose before dawn to tend his fields, leaving fresh eggs and milk on the table. Sarah insisted on earning their keep by cooking, cleaning, and mending his clothes that had gone too long without proper care. Emma, after her initial shyness, began following Samuel around the farm like a small shadow, asking endless questions about the chickens and Augustus the horse, but the peace was deceptive. Crawford's response came swiftly and ruthlessly. First, the general store stopped accepting Samuel's produce. Mr. Henderson pulled him aside one morning, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. "I'm sorry. Sam," he whispered. "Crawford owns part of my loan. If I buy from you, he'll call it in. I've got a family to feed too." The same story played out at the feed store, the blacksmith, even the church. Reverend Mills avoided Samuel's eyes when he suggested that perhaps it would be better if he didn't attend services for a while, to avoid disruption. Within 2 weeks, Samuel was effectively cut off from the town's economy, but worse was coming. One morning, Samuel found 3 of his chickens dead, their necks wrung. A week later, someone had diverted his irrigation ditch in the night, flooding his small vegetable garden and drowning half his crops. Fence posts were pulled up, tools went missing, and one night he woke to find his barn door open and Augustus wandering loose, spooked but unharmed. Thank God. Through it all, Sarah watched Samuel with growing distress. He never complained, never suggested she and Emma should leave, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the worry lines deepening around his eyes. "This is my fault," she said one evening as they sat by the fire after Emma had gone to bed. "No," Samuel said firmly. "This is Crawford's doing, not yours." "But if I hadn't—" "If you hadn't what? Refused to marry a man you don't love? Chosen your own dignity over his money?" Samuel shook his head. "Don't apologize for having courage." "Sarah." She studied him in the firelight. "Why don't you have a wife, Samuel? A good man like you." He was quiet for a moment. "There was someone once, back in Ohio. Her father said I wasn't good enough. No money, no prospects. She married a banker's son." He poked at the fire. "Guess I came out here to prove him wrong, to prove I could amount to something." "You have," Sarah said softly. "You've built all this with your own hands. You've stood up to Crawford when no one else would. You're worth 10 of him." Samuel looked at her then, something shifting in his expression. "Funny thing is, none of that seemed to matter much until now. Building a farm's one thing. Having something worth protecting, that's another." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then a sound outside made them both freeze. Horses, moving fast. Samuel grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. "Stay back!" But it was too late. The door burst open, and Wade Garrison entered with 2 other men, all armed. Samuel raised his rifle, but Garrison was faster, knocking it aside. "Evening. Hart." Garrison drawled. "Mister, Crawford sends his regards." What followed was brutal but calculated. They didn't touch Sarah or Emma, who had woken and clung to her mother in terror, but they made sure both watched as they beat Samuel methodically, professionally. Not enough to kill or permanently maim. Crawford was too smart for that, but enough to send a message. When they finally left, Samuel lay groaning on the floor, his face bloodied and ribs almost certainly cracked. Sarah immediately went to him, using skills learned from tending her late husband's mining injuries. "Emma, bring water," she said calmly, though her hands shook. "And the clean rags from the kitchen." As she worked, Samuel tried to speak through split lips. "You should go." "Hush," Sarah said fiercely. "Don't you dare tell me to leave. Not now." It took hours to clean and bind his wounds. Emma helped with quiet efficiency that broke Sarah's heart. No child should be so practiced at tending injuries. Finally, they got Samuel into bed, where he fell into an exhausted sleep. Sarah sat vigil through the night, rifle across her lap, while Emma curled up beside her. As dawn broke, she made a decision. When Samuel woke, she was waiting with a cup of water and a determined expression. "I'm going to town," she announced. "Sarah, no. Listen to me," she interrupted. "Crawford thinks he can starve us out, beat us into submission, but he's wrong. There are others in town who hate what he's doing, who are just too scared to act. Mrs. Martinez, for one, Jacob Miller, even Martha Jennings. If we can reach them, unite them." "Crawford owns half the town," Samuel said painfully. "But not all of it, and ownership isn't everything. People have consciences, Samuel. They just need someone to remind them." Samuel caught her hand. "It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous now," Sarah replied. "But hiding here, letting him wear us down, that's not living. That's just slower dying." She was right, and he knew it. "What will you do?" "What I do best," Sarah said with a grim smile. "I'll survive, and I'll help others remember they can too." That afternoon, leaving Emma to tend Samuel, Sarah walked into Cedar Ridge with her head high. She went first to Rosa Martinez, who ran a small boarding house on the Mexican side of town. "Rosa," she said simply, "I need your help." Rosa glanced nervously at the street. "Sarah, you know I want to help, but Crawford doesn't own your boarding house." Sarah interrupted. "Your husband built it, paid for it clear. Crawford has no hold over you except fear." Rosa's eyes flashed. "Easy for you to say. You don't have 5 children to protect." "No," Sarah agreed. "I have one, and I'm protecting her by fighting back. Rosa, how long will we let one man dictate our lives? Today it's me he's persecuting. Tomorrow it could be you, or any woman who displeases him." Rosa was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you need?" "Spread the word quietly. Anyone who's tired of Crawford's tyranny. Anyone who believes people should be free to make their own choices. Tell them to meet at the old mine shaft on Sunday evening. It's time we stood together." Rosa nodded slowly. "I'll try." Sarah made similar visits throughout the day. to people she knew chafed under Crawford's control. Some turned her away, too frightened, but others listened, and in their eyes she saw a spark of something that had been missing: hope. As she finally headed back to Samuel's farm, she noticed she was being followed, not closely, not threateningly, but watched. Let them watch, she thought. Let Crawford know that breaking Samuel hadn't broken her. That night, as she told Samuel about her day, she saw something new in his eyes, admiration mixed with fear for her safety. "You're remarkable," he said softly. "I'm desperate," Sarah corrected. "There's a difference." "No," Samuel insisted, catching her hand. "Many people get desperate. Few turn it into courage." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his battered but strong, hers work-worn but steady. In that moment, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Not alone. "We might lose everything," she warned. "Then we'll lose it together." Samuel replied. Outside, the wind howled across the barren fields, winter creeping closer each day. But inside the small farmhouse, warmed by the fire and something harder to name but just as real, hope took root. Crawford had wealth and power. But Sarah and Samuel had something he couldn't buy or beat out of them: the conviction that freedom, even difficult freedom, was worth any price. And they were about to find out they weren't the only ones who felt that way. Winter arrived early that year, bringing with it a bitter wind that cut through even the thickest coats. The first snow fell in late October, dusting the mountains white and turning the roads to mud. For Sarah and Emma, still sheltering at Samuel's farm, each day became a battle against the cold that seeped through every crack in the walls. The secret meetings at the old mine shaft had grown from 5 frightened souls to nearly 20, but their small rebellion had come at a cost. Crawford had tightened his grip on the town, and those suspected of sympathizing with Sarah found themselves facing mysterious accidents and financial pressures. Then came the night that changed everything. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke and the orange glow dancing on the walls. "Fire!" she screamed, shaking Samuel awake. "The house is on fire!" But it wasn't the house. It was worse. Through the window, they could see Sarah's abandoned shack engulfed in flames, the dry wood burning like a torch against the night sky. And the barn, Samuel's barn, was ablaze too. "Augustus!" Samuel shouted, rushing outside in his night clothes. Sarah grabbed Emma and followed, her heart pounding. The heat hit them like a wall, and the roar of the flames drowned out everything else. Samuel ran toward the barn, but the structure was already collapsing. The old horse's terrified whinnies cut through the night, then suddenly stopped. "No!" Samuel fell to his knees in the mud, watching his barn crumble into burning timber. Sarah saw them then, riders disappearing into the darkness, their work done. Crawford's final warning. They managed to save the house, forming a bucket line from the well, but the barn was lost along with Augustus, most of the tools, and what little hay Samuel had stored for winter. As dawn broke over the devastation, Sarah found Samuel sitting in the ashes, his face gray with exhaustion and grief. "Augustus was with me from the beginning," he said quietly. "Pulled the plow that broke this land. He deserved better than this." Sarah knelt beside him, Emma clinging to her back. "I'm so sorry. Samuel, this is all my—" "Don't!" His voice was firm despite his grief. "Don't you dare blame yourself for Crawford's evil." But Sarah had reached her limit, looking at the smoking ruins, at Samuel's bent shoulders, at her daughter's frightened face. Something inside her snapped. "Enough," she said, standing. "Enough running. Enough letting him destroy everything we touch." Her voice rose. "If Crawford wants me that badly, maybe it's time I—" "No." Samuel caught her arm, understanding immediately. "You're not going to him. Look around." Sarah gestured at the devastation. "He'll keep doing this, to you, to anyone who helps us. How many more have to suffer because I'm too proud to— To what? Sell yourself to stop a tyrant?" Samuel stood, facing her. "You think giving in will stop him? It'll only prove he can break anyone." "But at what cost?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Your barn, your horse, Maybe next time your life—" Samuel gripped her shoulders, his eyes fierce. "Listen to me. Sarah Whitman. That man has taken enough. Don't you dare let him take your freedom too." They stood there in the morning light, covered in soot and ash, while Emma watched with wide eyes. Finally. Sarah's shoulders sagged. "Then what do we do? We can't survive winter without shelter for the animals, without—" "We rebuild," a voice said behind them. They turned to see Jacob Miller approaching with his wagon, followed by Rosa Martinez and her husband Miguel. Behind them came others, the blacksmith's apprentice. 2 farmhands from the Garrison Ranch who'd quit in disgust. Even Martha Jennings with her grown sons. "Heard you had some trouble," Jacob said simply. "Figured you might need help." Sarah's throat tightened. "But Crawford—" "Can't fight the whole town," Martha interrupted. "Not if we stand together." And so they began. While some stood watch, others cleared the rubble. Miguel Martinez, who'd built several structures in town, sketched plans for a new barn. The women organized food for the workers. Even Emma helped, carrying water and collecting bent nails that might be straightened and reused. But their hope was premature. Just past noon, Crawford himself arrived with a dozen armed men, including the sheriff, a weak man deep in Crawford's pocket. Well, Crawford said, surveying the scene from his horse. "Quite the gathering. I believe there are laws against unlawful assembly. Nothing unlawful about neighbors helping neighbors," Jacob Miller said steadily. "That depends on the neighbors." Crawford's cold gaze found Sarah. "Mrs. Whitman, you've caused enough trouble. Sheriff Thompson, I believe this woman should be arrested." "On what charge?" Samuel stepped forward. "Theft," Crawford said smoothly. "She's been stealing wood from my land. I have witnesses." It was a lie, but the sheriff was already moving forward with shackles. Sarah lifted her chin, ready to face this new injustice, when Emma suddenly broke free and ran to Crawford's horse. "Please," the child cried. "Please don't take my mama. We don't have anybody else." Crawford looked down at the girl with something that might have been discomfort. "Your mother should have thought of that before she didn't do anything wrong." Emma's young voice carried across the yard. "She just said no." "Why can't you leave us alone?" The question, in its childish simplicity, seemed to echo. Several of Crawford's own men shifted uneasily. Crawford's face darkened. "Get that child away from me." But Emma stood her ground. "My papa died in your mine. Isn't that enough? Do you have to take my mama too?" "Emma, come here," Sarah called, but the girl shook her head. "No, someone has to say it." She looked around at all the adults. "Why are you all so scared of him? He's just one man." "That's enough." Crawford dismounted, reaching for the child. What happened next occurred so fast that witnesses would argue about it for years. Samuel moved to protect Emma. Crawford's men raised their weapons. Sarah screamed, and then, "That's enough, indeed." A new voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned to see a distinguished man in a federal marshal's badge riding up with several deputies. "Marshal Kane," Crawford said, his composure cracking slightly. "What brings you to Cedar Ridge?" "Had several interesting telegrams." The marshal replied, dismounting. "Seems folks here have concerns about intimidation, arson, possibly murder." His sharp eyes took in the scene. The armed men, the frightened townspeople, the burned ruins. "Appears those concerns might have merit. These are local matters," Crawford began. "Arson's a federal crime when it's used for intimidation," Marshal Kane interrupted. "So's interfering with citizens' rights. Now, I suggest everyone puts their weapons down while we sort this out." The tension stretched taut. Crawford's men looked to him, waiting. For the first time since anyone could remember, Josiah Crawford looked uncertain. "You have no proof of any wrongdoing," he said finally. "Maybe not," the marshal agreed. "But I've got time to investigate, and something tells me folks might be more talkative with federal protection." He looked directly at Sarah. "Ma'am, were you being arrested?" "Yes, sir. For theft I didn't commit." "Sheriff, you got evidence for that charge?" Sheriff Thompson fumbled. Mr. Crawford said. Mr. Crawford isn't the law, Marshal Kane said firmly. Though seems some folks have forgotten that. Crawford's face was stone. This isn't over. No, the marshal agreed. I expect it's just beginning. Now, I suggest you and your men head on home while my deputies and I make sure these good folks can rebuild in peace. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Crawford remounted his horse. Remember, he told the crowd, I own this town. The marshal won't stay forever. After they'd gone, Sarah found her legs wouldn't hold her. She sank onto a salvaged crate, Emma climbing into her lap. Samuel stood protective behind them, his hand on Sarah's shoulder. Who sent for the marshal? Someone asked. Rosa Martinez raised her hand slightly. My cousin works at the telegraph office in Denver. I thought maybe it was time someone knew what was happening here. Marshal Kane approached Sarah. Ma'am, I'll need to hear everything. But first, he looked around at the gathered townspeople. Seems to me you folks have a barn to raise. And they did. All through the afternoon and into the evening, the sound of hammers rang across Samuel's farm. The frame of a new barn began to rise from the ashes of the old, stronger than before, because it was built not by one man's labor, but by a community's courage. As the sun set, painting the sky the color of hope and flame, Sarah stood with Samuel watching their neighbors work. It's not over, she said quietly. Crawford won't give up. No, Samuel agreed. But neither will we, and we're not alone anymore. Sarah looked at the barn rising against the sky, at her daughter helping Martha Jennings with dinner for the workers, at the federal marshal making notes as people finally found courage to speak truth. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe they might actually win. The federal marshal's presence had given the town breathing room, but everyone knew it was temporary. Marshal Kane could only stay another week before returning to Denver, and Crawford had retreated to his ranch like a wounded bear, plotting his next move. It came on a cold Tuesday morning, when Sarah was at the general store trading eggs for flour. The new barn at Samuel's farm was complete, and life had settled into an uneasy peace. She was discussing the weather with Mrs. Henderson when Crawford entered, alone this time, dressed in his finest black coat. The store fell silent. Mrs. Whitman, he said, removing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. A word, if you please. Sarah's hands tightened on her basket, but she kept her voice steady. We have nothing to discuss. Mr. Crawford. On the contrary. He moved closer, and Sarah noticed the calculating look in his eyes, different from his usual arrogance. I've come to make one final offer, a generous one. I don't want $5,000, he interrupted. Cash, enough to take your daughter and start fresh anywhere you choose. San Francisco, perhaps, or back east. All you have to do is leave Cedar Ridge tonight. The amount was staggering, more money than most people saw in a lifetime. Sarah heard Mrs. Henderson's sharp intake of breath. You want to buy my absence, Sarah said flatly. I want to resolve this situation peacefully. Crawford's voice was reasonable, almost pleasant. You've made your point. You're a woman of principle. I respect that, but this conflict helps no one. Take the money. Give your daughter a real future. Sarah studied him, this man who tormented her for months. And if I refuse? His mask slipped slightly. Then things will become unpleasant, not just for you, but for everyone who's helped you. The marshal leaves in 3 days. After that, he shrugged eloquently. You're threatening the whole town. I'm offering you a fortune to avoid unnecessary suffering. He pulled out a leather wallet, thick with bills. $5,000. Mrs. Whitman, here and now. Just walk away. Sarah looked at the money, enough to buy safety, comfort, education for Emma, enough to never worry about hunger or cold again. Around her, the other customers waited, barely breathing. You know what your problem is, Mr. Crawford? She said finally. You think everything has a price. You think every person can be bought, if you just find the right number. Because they can, he replied confidently. No. Sarah straightened her shoulders. They can't. I can't. My dignity isn't for sale. My freedom isn't for sale. And neither is my daughter's future. Not the future that matters. I won't teach her to run from bullies, no matter how rich they are. Crawford's face flushed. You stupid, stubborn. Yes, Sarah interrupted. I am stubborn, stubbornly free. And I'm staying right here in Cedar Ridge, whether you like it or not. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Crawford did something unexpected. He laughed. A cold, harsh sound. So be it. He put the money away with deliberate slowness. I tried mercy. Remember that, all of you. What happens next is on her head. He left without another word. Sarah stood trembling in his wake, knowing she'd just declared war but unable to regret it. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. By evening, most of the town knew about Crawford's offer and Sarah's refusal. Opinions were divided. Some called her foolish, others heroic, most just worried about what Crawford would do next. Samuel was furious when he heard, $5,000? Sarah, that could have— What? Bought our freedom? She whirled on him as they stood in his kitchen. Freedom isn't something you buy by running away. Samuel, it's something you claim by standing your ground. Even if it costs everything. Especially then. Her eyes blazed. Don't you see? If I took his money, if I ran, he wins. He proves that everyone has a price. That money trumps justice. I won't do it. Not for 5,000. Not for 50,000. Samuel stared at her. This slight woman with fire in her eyes and steel in her spine. You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met. Maybe both, Sarah admitted, her anger cooling. But I'd rather Emma grow up poor and proud than rich and ashamed. That night, as they sat by the fire with Emma asleep between them, Samuel spoke quietly. He won't let this stand. Crawford's never lost before. Then maybe it's time he learned how. Sarah stared into the flames. Samuel, I need to ask you something. This isn't your fight. You could still walk away, save yourself. Stop. His voice was firm. You think I'd leave now? After everything? I'm giving you the choice Crawford didn't give me. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Then he reached across Emma's sleeping form and took Sarah's hand. I made my choice that day at the market. I'm not changing it now. Even if we lose everything? What's everything? Samuel squeezed her hand gently. This farm? It's just land and wood. But standing for what's right, protecting people who matter, that's worth any price. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. You're a good man, Samuel Hart, and you're a remarkable woman, Sarah Whitman. 2 days later, Crawford made his move, but it wasn't what anyone expected. Sarah and Emma had gone to town for supplies, leaving Samuel to work on the fence. They returned to find a crowd gathered at the farm. Sheriff Thompson at the front with the official-looking document. What's happening? Sarah demanded. Pushing through the crowd, the sheriff wouldn't meet her eyes. Foreclosure notice, ma'am. Seems Mr. Hart's been defaulting on his loan payments. That's impossible. Samuel protested. I don't have a loan. I bought this land outright. Not according to this. Thompson held up the paper. Says here you borrowed against the property 6 months ago. Haven't made a single payment. That's a lie. Samuel reached for the document, but Thompson pulled it back. Got Mr. Crawford's signature as the lender, and yours as the borrower. All legal and proper. Sarah felt the trap closing. It's forged. Samuel never signed anything. That's for a judge to decide. Thompson said, Meanwhile, you've got till sundown to vacate the premises. The crowd stirred angrily. These were Samuel's neighbors, people who'd helped raise his barn, but what could they do against legal documents, even forged ones? This ain't right, Sheriff. Jacob Miller spoke up. You know it ain't. I enforce the law. Thompson replied uncomfortably. Document says the land belongs to Crawford now. That's all I need to know. Then you're a coward and a fool. Martha Jennings declared, hiding behind false papers while a good man gets robbed. More voices rose in protest. But Crawford's men were there too, hands on their weapons. Violence hung in the air like smoke. It was then that Samuel did something unexpected. He laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine amusement. "Something funny? Heart?" Sheriff Thompson asked nervously. "Just thinking," Samuel said, loud enough for all to hear. "Crawford's so desperate to win, he's reduced to forgery, the richest man in 3 counties, and he's got to lie and cheat to beat one farmer and a widow." He looked around at the crowd, his voice carrying clearly. "You all see it, don't you? This isn't about land or money. It's about power. Crawford can't stand that someone told him no, so he'll break any law, tell any lie, to crush them." "Enough talk," Thompson said. "You vacating peaceful or not?" Samuel looked at Sarah, then at the crowd of neighbors. "Sheriff, I'll leave if you can answer one question. You really believe I borrowed money from the man who's been terrorizing me for months? You really believe that paper's legitimate?" Thompson's face reddened. "Doesn't matter what I believe. It's all that matters." Sarah stepped forward. "If you enforce a lie, you're part of the lie. Every person here knows the truth. Are you really going to pretend otherwise?" The sheriff looked around at the angry faces, at his neighbors and friends. For a moment, his resolve wavered. Then Crawford himself appeared, riding up with more armed men. "Problem, Sheriff?" "No, sir, Mr. Crawford. Just explaining the eviction." Crawford smiled coldly at Sarah and Samuel. "I did warn you, both of you." He raised his voice. "Let this be a lesson to all. Cross me, and you lose everything." "No," a voice called out. It was Rosa Martinez, stepping forward. "We've had enough lessons from you." "Crawford." "Amen to that," said Jacob Miller. One by one, the townspeople moved to stand with Sarah and Samuel. Not all. Some slipped away, too frightened or too compromised. But enough. More than enough. Crawford's smile faltered. "Sheriff, clear these people out. All of them." Thompson looked at the crowd. Friends, neighbors, decent people standing up for what was right. Something shifted in his face. I can't do that, Mr. Crawford." "What?" "I said I can't." Thompson's voice grew stronger. "Not without cause. These folks aren't breaking any law by standing here." Crawford's face went purple. "I own you. Thompson, you'll do as you're told, or what?" The sheriff unpinned his badge and held it out. "You'll have me fired? Go ahead. I'm tired of being owned." He dropped the badge at Crawford's feet and walked over to stand with the others. For the first time since anyone could remember, Josiah Crawford looked genuinely shaken. He'd lost control of the situation, and everyone could see it. "You'll regret this," he snarled. "All of you." "Maybe," Samuel said quietly, "but not as much as we'd regret doing nothing." Crawford wheeled his horse around. "This isn't over. That's my land now, legal and proper. I'll be back with real law enforcement, not these federal interlopers or spineless locals, and then we'll see how brave you all are." He spurred his horse and galloped off, his men following. The crowd remained, uncertain what to do next. It was Marshal Kane who broke the silence. He'd been watching from the back, letting events unfold. "Well now," he said, stepping forward. "Seems to me there's some question about the legitimacy of certain documents. Lucky for you folks, I've got authority to investigate fraud, especially fraud that seems connected to a pattern of intimidation." He picked up Thompson's discarded badge, examined it, then held it out to the former sheriff. "You made the right choice today." "Want to make another one? I could use a deputy who knows the local situation, someone with newfound backbone." Thompson stared at the badge, then slowly took it. Yes, sir. I'd be honored." Marshal Kane nodded, then addressed the crowd. "Folks, I'm extending my stay in Cedar Ridge. Seems there's more work here than I thought, and Mr. Hart, you just sit tight on your land. No one's moving you until we get to the bottom of these documents." As the crowd began to disperse, spirits higher than they'd been in months, Sarah found herself standing with Samuel in their yard. Their yard. No matter what Crawford's forged papers said, "We're not safe yet," Samuel warned. "Crawford's right about one thing. This isn't over." "No," Sarah agreed. But look what happened today. People stood up. Together. That's never happened before. Samuel put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into his strength. Emma ran over to join them, and he lifted her up with his other arm. Whatever comes next, he said, we'll face it together. Sarah looked at this man who'd risked everything for her, at her daughter who was learning courage instead of fear, at the neighbors who'd finally found their voice. Together, she agreed. The sun was setting over Cedar Ridge, painting the sky crimson and gold. Change was coming to the town, slow and dangerous but inevitable, and at the heart of it stood a penniless farmer and a stubborn widow. Proof that sometimes the richest man in town could be the poorest in spirit, while those with nothing but courage could be wealthy beyond measure. The confrontation came on a Friday afternoon, when the autumn sun cast long shadows across Cedar Ridge's main street. Crawford had been quiet for 3 days since the failed eviction, and the town held its breath, waiting for his next move. Sarah was at the market square with Emma, selling the last of the season's preserves she'd made from Samuel's meager fruit trees. Business had been surprisingly good. People were making a point of supporting them now, small acts of defiance that added up to something larger. She was counting change for Mrs. Peterson when the crowd suddenly parted. Crawford strode through like Moses through the Red Sea, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind him walked Judge Harlan from the county seat, a man known for being in Crawford's pocket, along with a dozen armed deputies, not local men, but hired guns from outside the territory. "Sarah Whitman," Crawford announced loudly enough for all to hear. "Time to settle this once and for all." Sarah handed Emma to Mrs. Peterson and stepped forward. "What now? Crawford? More forged documents? More lies?" "No lies." Crawford smiled coldly. "Just truth. The truth about what you are." He turned to address the growing crowd. "This woman stands here playing the virtuous widow, the noble resistor of oppression. But I wonder if you all know the real Sarah Whitman." Sarah's blood ran cold, but she kept her chin high. "Say what you came to say." Crawford pulled out a sheaf of papers. "Marriage certificate from Kansas City. Dated 8 years ago. Sarah McKenna. That was your maiden name, wasn't it? Married to one William Grieve. A marriage that was never legally dissolved." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Which means," Crawford continued with satisfaction, "that her marriage to Thomas Whitman was invalid. She's been living in sin. Her daughter is illegitimate, and she has no legal claim to the Whitman name or any property that came with it." "That's not true," Sarah's voice cracked. "William abandoned me. He left—" "Abandonment isn't divorce," Judge Harlan interjected smoothly. "The law is clear. Without proper divorce proceedings, your subsequent marriage was bigamous." Sarah's mind raced. William Grieve, a name she'd tried to forget. The charming man who'd swept her off her feet at 17, married her in haste, then disappeared with her small dowry 3 months later when he learned she was pregnant. She'd fled in shame, started over in Colorado, told everyone she was a widow. When she met Thomas Whitman, she'd truly believed William was dead or gone forever. "Even if this is true," a voice called out. "What's it matter now?" Samuel pushed through the crowd, having heard the commotion from the feed store. Crawford's smile widened. "It matters. Heart, because it makes her a fraud. A fallen woman who's been deceiving this entire town. Still want to champion her cause?" Samuel moved to stand beside Sarah. "I know who she is. A woman who survived more than most could bear. A mother protecting her child. That's all that matters to me." "How touching," Crawford sneered. "The failed farmer and the false widow. But romantic notions don't change the law." He nodded to the deputies. "Arrest her." "On what charge?" Marshal Kane appeared, having been alerted by the commotion. "Bigamy." Judge Harlan stated, "Fraud, moral turpitude, take your pick." "Interesting," the marshal said slowly. "And you just happened to discover this information now? After months of trying to force this woman into marriage?" Crawford's eyes narrowed. The truth is the truth, regardless of when it comes to light. "Papa Crawford!" a young voice cried out suddenly. Everyone turned to see a boy of perhaps 16 pushing through the crowd. He was well-dressed but disheveled, his face flushed with anger. Crawford went rigid. "Daniel, get back to the ranch. Now!" "No!" The boy stepped into the circle. "I won't let you do this anymore." Sarah had seen the boy before. Crawford's son from his late wife. Usually kept away from town business. But here he was, trembling with determination. "Daniel." Crawford's voice held warning. "This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't it?" Daniel looked around at the crowd, then back at his father. "Tell them about Mother. Tell them how she really died." The square went deadly silent. Crawford's face drained of color. "Your mother died of fever. Everyone knows. Everyone knows what you told them." Daniel's voice broke. "But I was there. I saw the bruises. I heard her crying at night. I saw what you did to her." "The boy's upset," Crawford said quickly. "He doesn't know what he's saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." Daniel turned to the crowd. "My mother didn't die of fever. She died of a broken heart and a broken body. And when she was dying, she made me promise I'd never let him do it to another woman." He looked at Sarah then, tears streaming down his young face. "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I was scared. But I can't watch him destroy you like he destroyed her." The crowd exploded in shocked murmurs. Crawford lunged for his son, but Samuel stepped between them. "Don't," Samuel said quietly. "You've done enough damage." "You dare!" Crawford reached for his gun, but froze as he found himself staring down the barrels of several weapons. Not from the hired deputies, but from the townspeople. Jacob Miller, Miguel Martinez. Even old Martha Jennings had an ancient pistol trained on him. "The boy's lying," Crawford said desperately. "He's always been weak-minded, influenced by the truth?" Marshal Kane stepped forward. "Seems to me we need a real investigation here, into several matters, including how you came by Mrs. Whitman's personal history from Kansas City. I have connections. I'm sure you do. The kind that forged documents, maybe." The marshal's voice was steel. "Judge Harlan, I think you'd better head back to the county seat. Your services aren't needed here." "This is outrageous," Harlan blustered. "I have authority, and I have federal authority that supersedes yours." Marshal Kane replied. "Especially in cases involving potential corruption. Leave now." The judge looked at Crawford, then at the armed townspeople, and decided discretion was the better part of valor. He retreated hastily. Crawford stood isolated now, his hired guns uncertain, his son weeping openly, his carefully constructed power crumbling. "It's over, Crawford," Samuel said. "Your reign of fear ends today." "Nothing's over," Crawford snarled. "You think this changes anything? I still own half this town. I still have power you can't imagine." "No," Sarah spoke up, her voice steady despite everything. "You have money, you have influence, but power? Real power comes from respect, from people choosing to follow you, and you've lost that forever." She looked around at the crowd. These people who'd witnessed her humiliation but stood by her anyway. "Yes, I was married before. Yes, I ran from a man who hurt me. Yes, I've made mistakes. But I've never used my pain as an excuse to hurt others. Can you say the same, Mr. Crawford?" "She belongs to no rich man," Samuel declared, echoing words from weeks before. "If she must belong, then let her belong to me." He dropped to one knee in the dusty street, right there in front of everyone. "Sarah Whitman, or whatever name the law says you have, will you marry me, properly, legally, with everyone as witness?" Sarah's hands flew to her mouth. Emma broke free from Mrs. Peterson and ran to them. "Say yes, Mama," the little girl cried. "Mr. Samuel's good and kind, and he never hurts anybody." The crowd held its breath. Crawford stood frozen, watching his grand humiliation transform into something else entirely. Sarah looked at Samuel kneeling in the dust. This man who'd lost so much defending her, who knew her secrets and wanted her anyway. She thought of Thomas, her late husband, and somehow knew he'd approve. He'd want her to find happiness again. To be safe and loved. Yes, she said softly. Then louder. Yes, I'll marry you. Samuel Hart. The crowd erupted in cheers as Samuel stood and swept her into his arms. Emma danced around them, laughing. Even some of Crawford's hired guns were grinning. No, Crawford roared. I won't allow it. She's a bigamist, a fraud. A survivor, Marshal Kane interrupted. And as for the bigamy charge, I'll need to investigate whether this William Grieve is even alive. Abandonment that long ago. Without word. Could be he's dead. Making her a widow proper. These things take time to sort out. Meanwhile, she's free to make her own choices. He looked hard at Crawford. And you, sir, have some questions to answer about your wife's death. Your son's made serious accusations. I think we need to have a long talk. Crawford looked around wildly, but found no allies. His money couldn't buy him out of this, not with his own son testifying against him, not with the whole town finally united in opposition. This isn't over, he said weakly, the familiar threat sounding hollow now. You're right, Sarah agreed, still held in Samuel's strong arms. It's just beginning. A new beginning for Cedar Ridge. One where money doesn't trump justice, where fear doesn't rule, where people are free to choose their own lives. Daniel Crawford stepped forward hesitantly. Mrs. Whitman, I'm sorry for everything my father's done. I should have spoken sooner. Sarah reached out and touched the boy's shoulder gently. You spoke when it mattered most. Your mother would be proud. The boy broke down completely then, and it was Martha Jennings who gathered him up, clucking like a mother hen. Come along, boy. You'll stay with me tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what's to be done. As the crowd began to disperse, Crawford found himself alone with his hired guns, who were already calculating that their employer's power was broken. One by one, they melted away, leaving him standing solitary in the street he'd once ruled, until a penniless farmer claimed her hand, someone in the crowd murmured, and the phrase was taken up, passed along, becoming not mockery, but celebration. Samuel set Sarah down gently, but kept his arm around her. We should talk to Reverend Mills about a wedding, a proper one this time, with the whole town invited. After we sort out the legal matters, Sarah said practically, though her eyes were shining. Details. Samuel waved dismissively. I've waited this long to find you. I can wait a little longer to make it official. As they walked away together, Emma between them, the sun broke through the clouds that had gathered, bathing the street in golden light. Behind them, Crawford stood like a statue, watching everything he'd built on fear and greed crumble to dust. The revolution had come to Cedar Ridge not with guns or violence, but with truth, courage, and the simple power of people choosing to stand together. And at its heart were a penniless farmer and a woman who'd refused to be bought, proving that sometimes the greatest treasures couldn't be counted in dollars or measured in acres, but in the freedom to choose one's own fate. The investigation into Crawford's affairs moved swiftly. Marshal Kane, true to his word, had sent for additional federal agents, and what they uncovered sent shockwaves through Cedar Ridge. Forged documents, intimidation, suspicious deaths among miners who'd threatened to organize. Crawford's empire of fear had deep, dark roots. Within 2 weeks, Josiah Crawford was arrested on federal charges. The morning they took him away, half the town gathered to watch. He sat in the prison wagon, his expensive clothes replaced with common cloth, his proud bearing finally broken. As the wagon passed Samuel's farm, Crawford looked up and saw Sarah standing by the gate. For a moment, their eyes met. Then Crawford looked away, and the wagon rolled on toward Denver and justice long delayed. It's strange, Sarah said to Samuel as they watched the dust settle. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but I just feel empty. Samuel put his arm around her. That's because you're not built for hatred. Sarah, you fought for freedom, not revenge. There's a difference. The legal matters regarding Sarah's first marriage were resolved more simply than expected. Marshal Kane's investigators found death records for William Grieve. killed in a saloon fight in California 3 years after abandoning Sarah. She had been a true widow when she married Thomas, making Emma legitimate and their marriage valid. With that shadow lifted, preparations for Sarah and Samuel's wedding began in earnest. The whole town threw itself into the celebration, as if by making this union joyful, they could wash away the bitter months of fear. Rosa Martinez and the Women's Sewing Circle made Sarah a wedding dress from fabric donated by merchants finally free to follow their consciences. Martha Jennings baked enough cakes to feed half the territory. Even Daniel Crawford, now living with the Jennings family and healing from his own wounds, contributed by playing his mother's violin for the ceremony. The wedding was set for a clear Saturday in November. Before the worst of winter set in, Samuel had worked tirelessly to improve his small house, adding a proper room for Emma and patching every crack that might let in the cold. The farm would never be grand, but it would be warm and filled with love. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright. Sarah stood in Rosa's boarding house, letting the women fuss over her appearance. Emma twirled around in her own new dress, blue as the Colorado sky. "You look beautiful, Mama," the little girl said, "like a princess in the storybooks." "No, mija," Rosa corrected gently. "She looks like what she is, a woman who fought for her freedom and won." The ceremony was held in the meadow behind the church, the mountains standing witness in their purple majesty. It seemed the entire town had come, filling the space with warmth despite the cool air. Reverend Mills, who had found his courage along with the rest of them, performed the service with genuine joy. Samuel waited at the makeshift altar, Jacob Miller standing as his best man. When the wedding march began, played on Daniel's violin with haunting beauty, Samuel's breath caught at his first sight of Sarah. She walked slowly, Emma beside her as maid of honor, and Samuel thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful than this woman who'd chosen him. A penniless farmer with nothing to offer but love and honest work. Dearly beloved. Reverend Mills began. "We gather today not just to witness a union, but to celebrate a victory. For love has conquered fear, truth has defeated lies, and courage has overcome oppression." When it came time for the vows, Sarah and Samuel had chosen to write their own. Samuel went first, his voice strong and clear. "Sarah, you came into my life like a storm, shaking me from the quiet existence I'd accepted. You showed me that some things are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for. I may not have wealth to offer you, but I promise you this. My hands will work every day to provide for you and Emma. My strength will always stand between you and harm, and my heart will be yours until the mountains crumble to dust." Sarah's eyes glistened as she spoke her vows. "Samuel, you stood for me when no one else would. You saw past my fear and pride to the woman underneath. You gave me shelter without condition, protection without price, and love without demands. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to make your simple house a home filled with laughter, to be your partner in all things, and to love you with the same fierce devotion you've shown me." The rings, Reverend Mills said. Samuel produced 2 simple bands, not gold, which he couldn't afford, but carved from horn and polished until they gleamed. "I made these myself," he explained quietly. "From the horn of the first steer I raised on this land. They're not fancy, but they're honest, like us." Sarah smiled through her tears. "They're perfect." As they exchanged rings, a murmur went through the crowd. Someone pointed to the sky where an eagle circled, its cry piercing and free. The old-timer said it was a sign, the spirits of the land blessing this union born of courage. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Mills declared, his voice rising, "and more importantly, by the power of love that conquers all obstacles, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Samuel, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle, tender, full of promise. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the mountains. Emma threw herself at them both, and Samuel lifted her up so the 3 of them stood embraced, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and sacrifice. The celebration that followed was like nothing Cedar Ridge had seen. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by everyone. Musicians played, and dancing went on until the stars came out. Former enemies shared drinks, old feuds were forgotten, and the town began to heal. As the evening wore on, Sarah found a quiet moment to stand apart, looking up at those vast western skies. "No regrets?" Samuel asked, coming to stand beside her. "None," she said firmly. "Oh, Samuel, when I think of where we started, me in that leaking shack, you alone on your farm, both of us just trying to survive, and now look." Samuel gestured to the celebration. "We're not alone anymore. Neither of us." Marshal Kane approached them, ready to leave for Denver in the morning. "Want to thank you both," he said. "What you did here, standing up to Crawford, it matters more than you know. There are Crawfords in every town, men who think money gives them the right to own others. You've shown people they can fight back." "We just wanted to be free," Sarah said simply. "That's how all the best fights start," the marshal replied. He tipped his hat. "You ever need anything, you send word. The federal government doesn't forget its friends." Later, as the celebration finally wound down, Sarah, Samuel, and Emma made their way back to the farm, their farm now. The little house glowed warm in the lamplight, welcoming them home. "It's not much," Samuel said apologetically as they stood on the threshold. "It's everything," Sarah corrected. "It's honest, it's ours, and we're free. What more could anyone want?" They went inside together, Emma yawning and ready for bed in her new room. As Sarah tucked her in, the little girl asked, "Are we safe now? Mama, really safe?" Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair. "Yes, sweetheart, we're safe, Mr. Samuel, Papa Samuel now, will take care of us, and we'll take care of him. And we'll be happy? We already are," Sarah said softly. "We already are." Later, as Sarah and Samuel sat by their own fire, finally alone, finally at peace, Samuel spoke quietly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For saying no to Crawford. If you'd said yes to him, or taken his money and left," he shook his head, "I never would have found this." "Found you?" Sarah leaned against his shoulder. "We found each other, two stubborn souls who refused to break." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Crawford ever understood why I kept refusing?" "No," Samuel said certainly. "Men like him can't understand that some things can't be bought, that freedom, real freedom, is worth more than all the money in the world." Outside, the wind sang through the valleys and peaks of the Colorado Territory, carrying the scent of snow and pine and endless possibilities. Inside the small farmhouse, a family born of courage and conviction settled in for their first night of their new life together. The next spring, the farm that had barely supported one now flourished under their combined care. Sarah's garden grew vegetables they sold at market, a market where she was welcomed with respect. Samuel's fields, worked now with hope instead of mere survival, yielded better than ever before. Emma thrived, attending the school where she was no longer the outcast widow's daughter, but the brave girl who'd stood up to the richest man in town. And sometimes, on clear evenings, the three of them would stand together looking out at their land, not much by some standards, but theirs, honestly earned and freely held. Sarah would remember that desperate woman who'd gathered sticks to survive. Samuel would remember the lonely farmer who'd almost given up on life being anything more than existence. And both would marvel at how standing up for what was right had changed everything. For in the end, it wasn't about rich men or poor farmers, about who owned what or who had power. It was about the choices people made when tested, about finding courage in the darkest hours, and about discovering that love, true love, was worth any risk, any sacrifice. The red dust of Colorado had seen many stories, but few as powerful as this, when they mocked and beat her for refusing a rich man. She stood firm, until a penniless farmer claimed not just her hand, but her heart, proving that in the Wild West, as everywhere, the human spirit's yearning for freedom and dignity could triumph over any odds. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the dusty trails and brave hearts of the Old West. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and the untamed frontier spirit. What did you think of Sarah and Samuel's story? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow admirers of these timeless Western tales.